I kind of think about it as like, how do you want to spend your energy? Both options are going to take a lot of energy and time to kind of get things lifted off the ground. Either you come into an established practice and you're the new person, probably changing things up, or you're starting something from scratch and having to build.
This is the only time I have seen a practice transition not be successful. It doesn't have to do with almost anything financial. It has everything to do with the philosophy of the practice of medicine and team culture. That's it.
I'd say if you don't know what you're doing, just buying a practice that's established might have some greater ease. But at the same time, I would caution that even walking into an established system, if you don't know how to manage it and what you're doing, there's still a learning curve. Many physicians, dentists, and veterinarians dream of the autonomy and financial freedom that comes with owning their own practice. But what often gets lost in that dream is the harsh reality of the business side. For many, it feels like navigating a jungle blindfolded. And frankly, I hear from doctors every day telling me they don't teach us anything about this in medical or dental school. Today, we're pulling back the curtain on the most pressing questions that keep aspiring practice owners up at night. What are the unspoken worries, the critical dilemmas, and the strategic hurdles they face? And more importantly, how can you avoid costly mistakes and fast track your path to practice ownership success? To help us navigate this complex landscape, I've invited two individuals who have directly guided countless healthcare professionals through these very challenges. They don't just understand the numbers, they understand the dreams and anxieties behind them. Joining me today are Carlson and Jenny Smerud, partners at Fiat Tax Advisors, who specialize in healthcare accounting. With years of experience helping doctors and dentists successfully buy, sell, and build thriving practices, they've seen a thing or two, and now they're here to share their firsthand experience with you. Carly and Jenny, thank you for joining me. How are you today?
Thanks. Good to be here.
Yeah, thank you.
And I'm your host, Airto Zamorano. I'm a healthcare executive who co-founded a growth agency in 2017 that specializes in helping medical practice leaders reach their goals. So Carly, you and I have coordinated with several different private practices aside from our individual experience. Over that time, I've grown to truly respect your approach, as I think we agree on how we should take care of clients. So Jenny, tell me about the work you and Carly do together.
Sure. Yeah. So Carly and I have worked together for years in a niche healthcare CPA practice. So we serve medical groups, dentists, and veterinarians, and we help them with tax planning, tax compliance, and practice acquisition and practice sales. We do specialized business consulting for them. So looking at production and giving them business advice on their financials, as well as physician comp consulting, just really trying to partner and really be one-stop financial shop for them to grow and run their business.
Excellent. Well, we have a nicely planned discussion to address the things you want to consider when deciding whether or not to buy a practice or launch one from scratch. Clearly, there are a lot of different topics within this topic, so we're going to focus on the accountant's view of things, and perhaps I'll pepper in some other details as needed. So let's get into it.
Yeah, we're excited.
So let's break this into 4 phases. The pros and cons of buying versus starting a new practice, the financial side and what to expect, evaluating an existing practice before buying, and number 4, the challenges of starting from scratch. So we'll jump into phase 1 here. I'll let you open it up. So the pros and cons of buying versus starting a new practice. Why don't we just kind of let you lead in with that one? Maybe Jenny or Carly, you go.
Jenny, I'll let you take it off, and I have some thoughts I'm sure I can add in.
Sure. Yeah. Well, so I mean, obviously, if you're buying a practice, you're buying a patient base. You're probably entering into a lease that's already established. You're probably walking to a place that's already got their ops prepared and fixed assets there, and you probably have a staff available to you. So, if you're buying a practice, you have some of the hard work that needs to happen to get your doors open already established. If you're starting from scratch, then you're establishing it all yourself. But I mean, I'll just start really basically some basic pros and cons are, if you're buying a practice, you are bringing yourself to a practice that already has all those things in place. So determining whether or not how you practice is a fit with the established practice, how you fit with the staff, how you like the space, how the patient base is organized, those are things that I think you adapt more to buying something versus If you're starting it, you're building it. Your reputation is bringing in the patient base. You're designing the space, you're choosing the space. So that's the first thing that comes to mind to me, is just really stepping back and going, okay, what do I want for my practice, and who am I as a physician, a veterinarian, a dentist, and how do I want to get this going? That's the first thing that comes to mind. Carly, do you have some other thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, everything that you said so eloquently, I kind of think about it as like, how do you want to spend your energy? Both options are going to take a lot of energy and time to kind of get things lifted off the ground. Either you come into an established practice and you're the new person, probably changing things up, or you're starting something from scratch and having to build. And so I really like to think about like, what's the energy that you have to put into that? Where's your excitement? As I look at like our clients and then kind of compare it to our journey, we started Fiat Tax from scratch. And so I kind of understand that model, but there was a lot of work into doing that. But we had reasons. So the reason that we thought about kind of building something from scratch versus buying something is that, like, in our world, traditional CPA firms, a lot of times they're like your local CPA in your neighborhood. The clients are all around that CPA firm, maybe not niched. And a lot of times, like, still pretty old school. If you're acquiring from someone who's retiring, they're like, might have everything on paper. The technology's outdated. The systems are outdated. So I knew that was going to be a really hard lift. And, Jenny, you and I have built this firm that is nationwide. So we work and serve healthcare practices around the country. And I knew that that meant we were going to need to leverage technology and systems and people in a very different way than a traditional CPA firm. So starting from scratch made sense. So I really like to think about what's the energy you have, but too, like, what's the vision that you have for your practice? And if you're trying to do something new, the lift to take something that's existing and completely convert it is going to be hard. That's hard on the patients because their experience completely changes, but that's also really hard on the team you've acquired for you to like become their new boss and then flip it all upside on its head.
Yeah, I've seen that from a number of directions myself.
I just really want
Whether
as to this
a private
journey
practice
to
acquisition
acquire a new
by
business.
a private
I think
owner
it's
or
important.
hospitals purchasing a practice. I've seen that it's a massive change, and
Yeah.
there are a number of things that you have to plan for in that change. There's a change management requirement. And if you neglect that, it will hurt you.
Yeah.
And that comes down to things like, when I look at we're buying a practice, like, what am I buying is the first question, right? If I'm buying something that's well-established, strong brand, great team, plug and play, that's the dream, right? And I don't know that it always goes that way. There's always something, and maybe it's perfect, but then you're the new piece. And then that has to be brought into the mix. So yeah, I think it's a great point. I mean, you really got to understand those details, because I've seen the after the fact where purchases go pretty poorly, where it doesn't turn out what they thought it was, because as soon as you remove the owner, operator, or key leadership team from before, it can go south pretty quick. So that's a great point you made. Well, let's look at it, some bullet points here. So what are the biggest financial differences between buying and starting a practice?
I mean, to me, I think, cash flow up front and how you kind of finance this. So if you are going to buy an existing practice, there are financials and tax returns and production reports that we can evaluate to look at how that practice is performing. And the bank can use that as a baseline for determining what they're willing to lend you so that you have the finances available. If you're starting something from scratch, we're building out a financial model for that practice from zero. And so there's more risk involved from the bank. And the financing portion of that deal can be a lot harder to nail down. And then I just think cash flow. So, if you're buying an existing practice, there's an existing stream of revenue that's there to serve you, to pay your loan and to pay yourself. And if you're starting from scratch, you should plan for a significant period of time where you're not getting a paycheck. And that also really changes the model. And sometimes that kind of takes that option off the table at the forefront.
Well, and a question for you, though. So when I look at it, buying a practice, I've got cash flow, revenue streams. I can build into the loan a way to cover that cost and hopefully also pay a salary and the expense up front. You want to look at a payback period, or, how long you believe. And then I would compare that against, can I do it myself? Am I buying something of value that gets me somewhere faster? And when I'm starting from scratch, you mentioned something like important. The banks, I found that the loan processes I've dealt with have gone relatively easy when you can show what you're doing. right? And I think you and I coordinated with that.
Yeah.
So when you can forecast, like, what does 3 years look like? What are the expenses going to be? So on and so forth. So whether it's investors or if I've got a loan, if you demonstrate, you know what you're doing, a lot of times that process looks very different than if you're going round after round trying to meet a conditions. But I would say forecasting, if you're going to launch it yourself, you need to have a very realistic idea of what those expenses look like. How long can you survive? Can you pull a loan large enough to pay yourself? Do you have money you're coming in with? The ramp up period, by the way, when you start planning and launching. So there is a formula that does work. I've been on both sides of it. I'm always a little biased towards starting my own, and we'll kind of go through that as we go through this. But just because I've been the CEO where people approach me saying, buy my practice. And my first question was, what am I buying versus, if I go at this myself, like, you're closing down a practice in this market that I just entered. Can I buy your practice and get somewhere faster? Or can I just go market and create it myself? Or, and that's where my brain's always at. I think it's a good thing to compare them and kind of understand. And we've talked about before that analysis also includes, am I built for this whole thing of building a brand new identity and launching it and trying to create a revenue stream?
I think too, though, that these aren't mutually exclusive. So you can start, you can get going, and then look in your market. And especially, I think in our profession, for sure, in the CPA world, but also in the medical field, there's a lot of people retiring. And so, if you get yourself established either through an initial purchase or purchase and also attracting your own patients, and then look in the neighborhood and see an opportunity, you can scale really quickly by continuing to acquire other practices alongside what you either started up yourself or already gotten off the ground through sort of that initial patient base.
Mm-hmm.
That's a great point. I mean, we've done that with a number of, sometimes we've done it for brand positioning. So now we own 2 brands that take up more visibility in the market. So it's a great idea.
Yeah. And Airto, I like what you alluded to, this idea of kind of the business mindset or what it takes to actually be a business owner. And I do think that there are times where, doctors kind of start to walk this process and realize, like, actually, I just want to practice medicine. Like, maybe all of this other stuff isn't for me. And ideally, you build a practice where you aren't doing all those things. But that initial phase, it's a lot on the business owner's shoulders. It's a lot of the doctor, like, essentially getting an MBA by going through this process of either buying or starting a business. So.
And most don't, right? What I usually see, because that's an exceptional point, right? What I usually see is you can get there and eventually, and you can kind of hobble your way there, and then you'll get your first person that works for you and you'll build something. And a lot of times it will work. I've seen a lot of practices that are kind of taped together. I love getting like literally financials written on an envelope, sideways, this is my financial number, but it's so much harder and it's riskier. So I think that when you're doing your planning in either scenario, understand what you should be doing and shouldn't be doing and plan that expense accordingly. So don't try to do your own taxes. Don't try to do your own marketing. There's certain things I just don't think you're going to be equipped for. And you can't save your way to growth. You'll probably hear me say that a number of times in these discussions. There is a cost to doing business, and that's it. And it's really important to and the odds are, if you're starting a new practice and you haven't done it before, you won't know these things. You don't know what you don't know. That's where you really need to find people who know what they're doing. You will spend less money long-term than if you hobble through it and figure it out yourself, not to mention the time savings. So I think that's true for buying or starting anew.
That there's a stat out there that of new businesses that are started. So entrepreneurs starting a new business, that within 5 years, 80% of those businesses will no longer be in existence. And I think that's a much smaller percentage within healthcare specifically. But I think that statistic is really interesting because to me, it's not because that business failed. It's all of the other parts of being a business owner that you don't realize you're stepping into. Most of the people that I know who are business owners, not only in the healthcare field, didn't go to school for business. Like all of my colleagues in the business program in college, they went to work for like corporate America. They didn't go start their own business and become entrepreneurs. And so the majority of business owners out in the world do not have a background in tax, accounting, finance, economics, and then go to start this business because they have this great idea and they're really passionate and they want to work for themselves and they love the idea of this flexibility. And, America kind of has this, there's the dream, right? Of like, making something for yourself and making something of yourself. And so it can be really exciting, but there's a lot of work on the backside. I think that gets lost.
Yeah. No, absolutely there is. And either you're going to do it or someone else is going to do it. And if you're doing it poorly, it costs you more than the expense of getting the right help. So like we talk about the learning curve for each approach. That's a really good discussion to have. I'd say if you don't know what you're doing, just buying a practice that's established might have some greater ease in terms of things that are already built out. There's already some HR compliance, the accounting, the numbers are structured. You might have an EMR system established, whatever it is, like a lot of those things being done. That is a pretty huge advantage, and you may benefit tremendously from that. The learning curve probably is a bit greater on the other side if you're going to go at it alone and try to figure out, build a plane while it flies. But at the same time, I would caution that even walking into an established system, if you don't know how to manage it and what you're doing, there's still a learning curve. So I wouldn't look at it that it's just automatic. I just show up, see patients, and I'm the owner, and the cash just flows. Like it's certainly not that simple. At the very least, you need a plan to brand yourself now as a new provider, taking over. And then the other thing is, once it's up and running too, understanding that the ongoing maintenance and management is non-negotiable. I have seen so much fraud, people doing things with the numbers, rewriting PTO policies right for retirement that pay out huge, like weird stuff that you would not fully expect. You learn that through experience and by doing. So that learning curve to me is, I think both ends, you're coming in with a huge responsibility. And that responsibility is more than just protecting yourself. My opinion is, you've got people's lives involved. As a business owner, you have responsibility first. I mean, it's like having another family, and their employees are your kids. You're responsible to keep them going. And if you don't manage the stuff correctly, it impacts people's lives, their jobs. So I would say in either scenario, I'd expect to really have a high sense of obligation and accountability to that. And if you do that, you'll have a better practice. So those are the ones who really have that all tied in. Typically, I see they're more profitable. It's not just an exercise of utility. It's actually, it'll serve you. It'll make you more money, and life will be easier. So, so another point here, which options give more control over branding, processes, and culture? Yeah.
That's a great question. I mean,
yeah.
I think in my mind, when you buy an existing practice, it's really hard to flip culture and branding on its head on day one. That might be something you can plan for and roll out eventually. But I think that's really hard to change as soon as you walk in the door. And so you know, as part of the due diligence process, now I would expect that the doctor who's buying is really working to evaluate, is this a culture that I want to buy? Not just, is this a business that I want to buy? And Jenny even talked about, right, is this the philosophy of practice the same? So do we see our patients and treat our patients in the same way? And if that doesn't align, that culture shock can really destroy a business. In fact, I have a client who's really struggling with that right now, bought a business, and the buyer and seller are not getting along. And so that smooth transition that might normally happen when you buy an existing practice, because the seller wants to see their patients taken care of and their team taken care of, is kind of falling apart. And it's truly just, they're very different personalities. And that wasn't part of the due diligence process, right? It was just a matter of numbers, and none of that qualitative stuff got evaluated during due diligence.
So this is the only time I have seen this topic is the only time I have seen a practice transition not be successful. It doesn't have to do with almost anything financial. It has everything to do with the philosophy of the practice of medicine. Can you transition this patient base to how you serve patients, and team culture? That's it. So as much as we as financial professionals really focus on, make sure the tax returns tie out, make sure we're looking at, vendor payments and, like kind of the typical due diligence checklist. And we as financial professionals are great at helping clients through that. And that's all very important. But the most important thing is you, the doctor, stepping in, if you're buying something, and saying, yes, I can fit with this team. I can fit in this neighborhood. I can fit with this patient base. This doctor does the same diagnostic things that I do. And so my revenue is not going to crash when I come in and do a different, set of procedures. So, and that's, none of us in everything that we're good at doing and helping a doctor transition can do that for our client. And that failure to evaluate that on a purchase is the only time that I have seen a practice acquisition go sideways.
Well, and I mean, I think this goes back to the question I'll probably bring up a few more times. Like, what am I buying? Right. And understanding it's just not automatic. The thing that you said that if there's an 80% fail rate over 5 years, and the sad part is at 7 and 10 years, there's still drop off rates, and that healthcare has a higher chance of success. Right. I've often joked like, well, you can get away with stuff in healthcare you couldn't get away with if you were a plumber or something. Because there's more money probably coming in. So there's this sense sometimes that we're doing better than we are. So when somebody comes in and wants to assess a purchase, I do think you should know what needs to be assessed, including not just the numbers. So the numbers look good. You mentioned something like, is this an area I can serve? I remember we had somebody call and they wanted to launch. They want to move from a state, their practice from one state to another, and they wanted to pay us a lot of money to do a demographic report, traditional. And we just asked some basic questions. How do you want to practice? I remember he wanted to go to San Diego. So I'm like, what do you want your commute to be? That shored that up real quick. When he said like, well, actually I've already got a spot where I live. It's going to be this and that. I was like, well, I think we just narrowed your focus a little bit. And now we can start to look at it a little bit differently in that radius. And so we were able to make it so much simpler. But think about this. This is a gentleman who'd been in practice for a long time. And something as simple as like, do you want to drive 2 hours to work? Hadn't been part of the consideration. So those little things that my lifestyle, look, if I've got an office manager that I don't like, maybe she runs everything but I don't like this person. I don't like the way they're doing. I don't like the way they keep books. Are you going to come in and remove them? Are you ready to do that? Like, one tactic is to clean house, see who's worth keeping and just plan to get rid of everyone else. I mean, you have to understand how that works. What if you're overstaffed? I see practices are carrying payroll 47%. And I don't think that's a healthy metric from my experience, right? So what if you're buying a practice that's that the doctor's known people for years. It's a great practice, but he's got two employees too many. Like, are you going to come in and adjust that? And are you ready to do that? So, yeah, I think you don't. The thing is, if I build it from scratch, I'm going to get the money in line, and then I got to build the team, and that is not easier. I mean, then we're recruiting, we're figuring it out, we're learning together. That's a path. On the other side, if I do walk in, the thought that you're just going to come in and say I'm the boss and it's all going to go your way, no, that's probably not going to happen either. Branding, you'll have a name and recognition when you buy something that is a huge thing you're purchasing. I mean, if I were to buy a practice that had a strong brand and was generating patients inbound, that's a massive deal to me. The question is, can I retain it? How much of it's tied to the doctor's name? How much is referral versus being discovered in a cold search? So yeah, you won't have a lot of control over that right away. Someone like we helped the guy buy a practice, and it was a year plan to phase out the other brand. It worked really well, but we had to take the time to understand what that looked like. How tied are they to this other provider? What is it like? When is the right time? So I don't think one's going to be necessarily easier. It's definitely case by case. I don't think there's a black and white answer. You got to evaluate the opportunity, but a huge part of it, Jenny, I think you were so smart to mention like the things that you can't, that aren't on the P&L, like the intangibles that we're going to evaluate: lifestyle, personality, practice, the way we practice. And that would be something I would say is worth as much time and attention as numbers. So anything else on that one? And the next bullet point I would talk about is another, but if anything else, feel free. But the common misconceptions doctors have about both paths. I'd love to hear from each of you on this one. I've got some ideas.
Well, I just want to add one more thing on the last kind of topic of, what's the learning curve and marketing and branding, and how hard that is to either do that in a startup versus an established practice. And just kind of one more thought I would add is that if you're really wanting to distinguish your practice as something different, like in dentistry specifically, I've seen a lot of this move to like a subscription-based model. So patients can, pay almost like an insurance fee, like a flat fee that covers their cleanings and dental work. Totally changes how patients are paid. In healthcare, more of this like concierge care. I think that's really hard to buy a traditional dental practice or a traditional medical practice and then flip it to one of these other models. So that would be like, if you know that you really want to like niche your practice or have kind of this like boutique-y type service, I probably would lean more startup than acquiring something existing, unless you can happen to find that, right? Like, can you find that practice that aligns with that unique model that you want to implement?
That's a great point, because From a business perspective, I look at it as my attitude toward business that's helped me. I run towards the thing a lot of folks run away from. So if something's hard, I if you tell me, well, that's really hard, in my head, I'm like, well, I want to I want to figure it out, because I've got this idea that what's hard is usually better for an outcome. And in healthcare, there is, especially I've seen it dentistry with our clients, they want to shift their practice. There's an idea there. And I think for some folks it's going super well. But if I'm buying a practice that's working, I do not want to come in and just hammer it is working and try to insert something completely. I have watched acquisitions that went that way go completely south. So yes, I think that's a really good point. If you have an entirely different vision, let's say you bought something because, man, like the location's great, the brand, but I want to do it my way. Okay, grow into it, test it. Don't just take a sweeping thing and do it. Otherwise, I have a feeling you could really hurt your revenue stream. And I've got some long-term clients that have made abrupt changes and it wasn't great. And then we're pivoting and scrambling back. So be cautious with that. But that was a really good point. I like that. So let's talk about some misconceptions. What did people think it's going to be like? What does it turn out to be? Yeah.
Well, I think one thing that came to mind, that's something we were talking about earlier, is I think that, if you've been an associate doctor, an employee at a practice, and now you're ready to be an entrepreneur, you're ready to go out and own your own practice. I think all we were talking about business ownership in general, if you've never had to make payroll, if you've never had to not pay yourself to make sure your team gets paid, if you've never had to deal with the HR issues that come up as in any kind of business, I think just a misconception is, I think everybody thinks of business ownership, I'm working for myself and I have the flexibility, all the positives, and those are all real positives, but you need to be prepared for, your team gets paid first.
By law.
Yeah. Well, everything you said about the responsibility, it's a heavy responsibility to have people on your payroll. And Carly and I, both business owners and have been business owners in different fields even. And, my husband and I owned a construction business in 2008. Which was a bad time to own a construction business. And
not a great time.
The responsibility that you have for your team and their families, it is heavy. It's heavy. And I think if you've never had that responsibility, if you've never thought, wow, I'm facing this decision to close a division or to, I have too many employees right now, I have to let this person go, or this person isn't performing. People kind of can talk big and say that, it's just a business decision. It's just a business decision. But these are human beings. They're people with families. And that it's a heavy weight. So I think that's a misconception I won't say a misconception, but something that people need to be grounded in when you take this leap, that, it's a huge responsibility, not only financial, but just as a person.
You mentioned some great points in that. One of which I would add to is your business is not a piggy bank. My father-in-law is a very successful business owner. And when I came out when I started my business with a lot of experience with building businesses. So there's a lot that I knew and understood, but I wanted to I talked to everybody I could that had been there. Like, tell me what I need to know. What should I be afraid of? What do I not want to screw up? And I always remember that advice was just two pieces that I loved. One, your business is not a piggy bank, and we've seen this. Like, listen. Alimony, child support, boats, like these things are not business expenses and you have to behave accordingly. And the second part of that is, and he said another piece that I loved, which is, and always remember you have your unwanted business partner, the government. So, and it's like, I knew that, but I loved hearing like his perspective. He's like, here's what I did day one. Here's how I set up payroll. And this chunk of cash went into an account. I never touched it. It's not mine. And that philosophy matched perfectly with, Megan and I, my wife, how we started the business together. We never had any debate on that. The other thing I would say is if you're going into business with anyone else, you should have a very strong operating agreement that outlines how those things will be handled, who has access to money, who's going to be handling what and why. But that's a big one. I think folks perceive, like, if you ever go out to dinner and it's like, oh, it's a business expense. Like there's this feeling like, oh, well, it's free. It's just money everywhere. No, it's not how it is. That's not how it works. The business brings in more money than it distributes, right? So there's this idea that there's all this money coming in. Not really. Those expenses are designed to plan for the future, to have money for a rainy day like COVID hitting. I saw practices that are bringing $10 million a year that were broke when COVID hit and they're in trouble. They're taking loans to make payroll. That's a lot of money coming in. So understand, like, that money really isn't what it looks like. If you've never managed revenue coming in and handled expenses and planned for taxes, I love that you brought that up, because that is a very common challenge, I think, where people get into trouble. You have to be very strict with your finances, and it's worth it. And it starts at the beginning, the planning side we talked about, but then it's the month to month. Just because I had a nice check come in or an extra, it doesn't mean you should necessarily touch it. I've always been of the philosophy that I set a payroll amount. I haven't changed our payroll amount since we launched. When we have money left over, and if we decide it's prudent to take some money for a bonus, then we will. But I'm very structured that way. And thankfully, my wife and I agree completely on that, because I've seen the other side, which is people are pulling out money for all the wrong reasons, and then you're in trouble. Mm-hmm. So that ties into your responsibility factor.
Yeah, for sure. I'd also add kind of the misconception about time. I think sometimes the idea is like, I'm going to go work for myself so that I can work when I want to work. And I mean, hey, some of that is true. Like, we all have families and kids, right? And yeah, like, ideally you can structure some of your work around what your family needs and have some flexibility and control over that flexibility to an extent. But I think there is some misconception that just like, that it will be less time when you're a business owner. And I think instead, if you're not careful, it can be more time. But what I think is that kind of weight, Jenny, that you talked about, that like the responsibility that you bear, I think there's like a time to that, right? There's like a mental time of that like processing load that you don't leave work at work, because you and your business now are so like intertwined and you carry it with you, that it can be more. And so figuring out how to manage that, how to dedicate some time in your normal work hours that are for like administrative, how do you work on the business and just not in your business? And that is a shift too. Like, you're not just a producer. You're not just like seeing patients and billing. You have a bunch of other things to do. And so the way you structure your day will need to change to allow time for all of the other parts of your job that are being a business owner and not being a doctor.
Absolutely. There's a saying that's funny, right? I'm sure a lot of people heard it, but entrepreneur will work 100 hours to avoid 40. Right. So you have this idea of wanting to work a job, not wanting to work for someone else, and want to be out from under those shackles. And I remember that, when I was employed, thinking, man, and then the second you work for yourself, as you get to higher level positions, you carry this weight as well. But when you work for yourself, you realize like all the things you might have thought that are automatic for that freedom, it just aren't. You're carrying a lot of extra weight. Now, here's what I will tell people. And I remember my brother reminded me, like, when we hit about 5 years, he's like, hey, look, you told me 5 years, things would get a lot easier, right? And he's like, you're taking more trips now, you're spending more time with the kids. I would say that's a fair projection. I'd say give yourself about 5 years. It may be sooner if you can get it there. And sometimes buying a practice can help you get there faster because things are established. But give yourself a realistic expectation that it's supposed to be very hard as a first rule. If it was easy, everybody would do it. So yes, it's supposed to be very hard. And if you do it right, that whole rolling the boulder up the hill and then the gravity takes it down the other side, that is, I think, extremely realistic, only if you do the things you're supposed to be doing. Yeah. But don't expect it's automatic, and don't come in with the idea that, well, I'm the boss, I can do whatever I want. Because I feel like I actually feel more restricted because of the sense of accountability, and I'm responsible. I don't feel like I have more freedom. I feel like there's more shackles on. I carry a lot of weight. It's really hard. It's really stressful. I've not taken a vacation where I'm not working in some way. It's a little bit different when you're a doctor, and you might be able to, you can't see clinics, but there's a lot of things that you will be responsible for, and expect that. And once you get to a point where you can trust someone else to do it for you, you are golden. That's great. But you're going to have to get to that point. And typically I want somebody super well trained and to have proven at least 10 times that they've executed flawlessly before I start to trust. So, the other piece of that, what I've noticed, a lot of people come in and they're always so busy. They're always flustered. I want help. I just want someone to take care of it. Those are all normal emotional things you're going to go through, but you have to figure all those out yourself, and how to manage your schedule and how to get the help you need, et cetera. So I think that the misconception is, I don't think people who haven't been there, they don't realize that that's what they're signing up for, whether it's a coffee shop or doctor's office, whatever. It's the same frustrations and stuff.
Yeah. I hope we're not scaring people away from this. I hope this conversation is not like, oh gosh, look at this weight you carry, because we're all business owners. Like, I just feel like,
I know we're just venting now.
No. It's so interesting because it's just something I totally believe in. And I believe that doctors should be able to be in private practice if that's what they want. And I want that to exist in our world. And I think there's a huge space for it. And there really is this American dream component that can happen.
Absolutely.
But to me, opening a practice or acquiring a practice, like that due diligence process, even this conversation today, my goal is always that you're doing that with eyes wide open. And so you like making this choice consciously for a thing that you want for your life and your family and your business and patients. All of those things should kind of work together, and you're making a choice knowing what you're walking into. And so I hope this isn't just like, wah, wah, like, yeah, look, don't do it. I don't want that to be the takeaway from this conversation, but there is like a seriousness and a gravity to being a business owner that like, yeah, I'm glad we're conveying that part, because I do think it can be overlooked, but I also just like, there is a blessing, right? There is a blessing to it as well, which is why so many people do it.
I will unapologetically tell people not to do it, most of you. No, I really mean that. I get approached a lot by people who want to get into something. And a lot of times I'm just like, look, I will open up by saying, I don't think you should. Most people should own a business. I don't think most people want what it actually entails, nor other people don't have what it takes. And that's not a criticism. It's really crazy and hard and risky. And even the best of times, things can happen. So be honest with that. And the thing I've learned is like real true entrepreneurs, people that this won't deter them. It won't phase them. So I think the real talk is what people want to know. And it's not just to be all negative, but it's so important that you understand the pros and cons. When I wanted to start this business, I had a pretty good job offer that it wasn't logical. On paper, it didn't make sense. Why would you take that risk at a great, well, I still want to do this thing. And, again, my father-in-law, being somebody who really inspired me, was just like, do it. Best decision ever made. But here's the ups and downs, so it's just a real discussion. But here's the good news. If you are somebody who has what it takes and you have this dream and you want to do it, I firmly believe your chance of success is almost 100% when you do the things that are proven to work. If you try to do it outside of that, you might still figure it out. You might create a whole new paradigm. Most people don't, but you might. But just be honest with yourself about that. Like, there's a way to do this stuff. I'm going to enter a market that's well established. Other people are doing it. And I see this a lot. And people come in and the big one, they don't want to spend the money that others spend. And I just look at them going, so you want to make millions of dollars, but you don't want to spend what those guys are spending. That doesn't make any sense, right? Or they don't want to manage their team, or they don't, right? So you'll notice that then I don't think it's going to work. But if you come in and go, well, what worked for those guys? And by the way, you can get that information. You have people like Carly and Jenny who know those answers. On my side, I know those answers. Then you have a really, really high chance of success. Then the fun part is you can put your head down and work really hard. And I feel pretty confident it's going to work out.
Yeah.
I agree.
Well, here's what we're going to do. So we got this 4-part discussion. I'm going to end this one here, and you can check out the next section. We'll separate them out. But these are very insightful tips. Anything else you want to add before I wrap this section up? And I hope you guys join us the next one here. But Jenny, Carly, anything else before we wrap this up and move to the next topic?
No, I think this is great.
All right.
Yeah.
For our listeners who are looking to navigate the complexities of healthcare accounting, practice acquisition, or optimizing their current practice's financial health, I recommend connecting with Carly and Jenny at Fiat Tax Advisors. You can find more information about their services at www.fiattax.com. And those for you seeking to reach your practice leadership goals, who want to speak with an advisor about how you can drive growth and practice efficiency, you can find my information in the description below. Thank you all for tuning in. I hope this was very helpful. Join us on the next episode, or check out our other podcast episodes where we discuss real world issues in healthcare. Until then, thank you both for joining me.
Thank you.